Ever heard of a ruler who liked to build pyramids out of the skulls of his enemies?
It's funny you should ask because
Yeah.
we're about to dive into the story of a guy who makes Genghis Khan look tame.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Who are we talking about?
Timur, also known as Tamerlane.
Okay. The name rings a bell, but I can't say I know much about him.
Well, get ready for a wild ride because his story's incredible.
I'm ready. So today's deep dive takes us back to 14th century Eurasia. And we're using Peter Jackson's 2024 book From Genghis Khan to Tamerlane, The Reawakening of Mongol as our guide.
Sounds fascinating.
Right. And to really understand Timur's rise, we kind of have to rewind a bit first.
So rewind to what exactly?
Well, to the legacy of the Mongols themselves.
Right, because it wasn't just about conquering territory, was it? They had this vast empire that stretched, like, from Korea all the way to the Euphrates River.
It's crazy, right? And they have these intricate trade routes spanning continents, all this cultural exchange happening, complex political systems.
Systems that, unfortunately, didn't exactly hold up so well after Genghis Khan's death.
Because everything started to unravel when the empire fractured, right?
Exactly. Imagine it. You suddenly have all these successor states, like the Golden Horde, all vying for power. It was chaotic.
And then, just to add fuel to the fire,
Just when you thought it couldn't get more unstable.
enter the Black Death.
Oh, man. The plague. Imagine the terror.
It's hard to even wrap our minds around a pandemic of that scale today.
Jackson argues it wasn't just a devastating pandemic, though. It totally reshaped the power dynamics of the region. You have these populations that are already decimated, economies are shattered, and tensions that were already simmering within the Mongol successor states. Well, the plague just threw gasoline on the fire.
It's almost impossible to imagine how anyone could rise to power in such a pressure cooker of a situation, but then,
But then, Timur steps onto the scene.
right, into this world that is still reeling from the plague, still under the shadow of Mongol rule, even though the empire is fractured.
A fascinating time to emerge, for sure.
What did that even mean for someone like Timur? Like, how did that impact his options?
That's the thing. He kind of had to play the hand he was dealt. And it wasn't like the Mongol influence vanished overnight.
Because people still remembered, right?
Exactly. Their military tactics, their laws, even their charisma, it still held sway over people.
So Timur couldn't just sweep the Mongol legacy under the rug, even if he'd wanted to.
No way. And Jackson uses this fantastic example in the book Timur's Claim of being a direct descendant of Genghis Khan.
Ooh, I've heard about that. He really pushed that narrative, didn't he?
Oh yeah. His court historians, they ate it up. They swore it was true.
What?
Sources outside of Timur's influence, well, they tell a very different story.
Let me guess. They're saying he made the whole thing up.
It's very likely. See, he was probably what the Mongols called Korju, a commoner.
So not a drop of Genghis Khan's blood in him.
Probably not. But by weaving this narrative, you see this link to Genghis Khan. He tapped into this lingering reverence people still had for the Mongol Empire.
That's next level strategy. He's using the very empire he's trying to, let's say, build upon, to legitimize his own rise.
Exactly. Pretty clever, huh?
Wow. That's incredible. It's like he's creating his own family tree, right?
In a way, yes. But it wasn't just clever storytelling. This connection to Genghis, it played perfectly into Timur's ambitions in a Central Asia that was, well, let's just say it was a bit messy at the time.
Right, because we're not talking about a united Mongol empire at this point.
Not at all. Think rival factions, shifting alliances, it was like a giant game of Risk.
Yeah.
And Timur, he was playing to win.
And he wasn't afraid to use any means necessary.
Exactly. Jackson does a great job of detailing how Timur expertly exploited those divisions. A little military might here, a strategic alliance there.
Oh, and don't forget the whole ruthlessly eliminating his rivals part. We can't leave that out of the story.
Oh, of course not. We can't ignore that. But even his brutality, it was calculated. Take the Siege of Isfahan, for example.
Okay, yes. Tell me more about that, because that one is notorious, even for Timur.
Oh, absolutely. So picture this. It's 1387. Isfahan is this prosperous city, and the rulers there, they make a fatal mistake.
Yeah.
They defy Timur's demand to surrender.
Oh no, that's never a good idea when it comes to Timur, is it?
Not at all. So
No.
Timur, he lays siege to the city, and when Isfahan finally falls,
What does Timur do?
well, he orders his troops to build towers out of skulls.
Wait, you mean like actual human skulls?
70,000 of them, according to some historical accounts.
Oh my gosh, that is horrifying. I mean, what kind of message does that even send?
A pretty clear one, I'd say. Defy me, right? And this will be your fate. It was a brutal tactic. designed to instill absolute terror.
And well, it worked, clearly.
It did. It's a grim thought, but effective, no doubt.
It's interesting, though, because for someone who clearly built his reputation on violence and terror, there's also this other side to him, this flourishing of art and culture that happened during his reign. How does that fit into the picture?
Right. It's really interesting when you think about it, because that's the paradox of Timur, isn't it? You have this man who, yes, he built pyramids out of skulls, but he also commissioned these breathtaking mosques, libraries that were overflowing with texts from all over the known world, astronomical observatories that were pushing the boundaries of scientific knowledge.
It's almost like he had this split personality, ruthless conqueror and patron of the arts.
It's more that he understood that true power wasn't just about brute force, it was about shaping a legacy too. Jackson talks about how you'd bring in these incredible artisan scholars, the best minds in their fields, to his capital in Samarkand.
He wanted to make Samarkand the cultural center of the world.
Exactly. And Jackson argues that in many ways, he succeeded. Even today, all these centuries later, the architecture, the scholarship, it still speaks to the ambition of Timur's vision.
So we have this incredibly complex figure, brilliant strategist, utterly ruthless when he needed to be, but also a huge patron of the arts. He builds this vast empire, but how in the world did he manage to hold on to it all? I mean, it can't be easy to rule an empire of that size. It's easy to think that ruling by fear, like Timur did, would make things a bit simpler.
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, like people would just be too scared to rebel.
You'd think. But it was never going to be that easy. Holding on to power, it's always way more complicated than seizing it in the first place. And Timur's empire, despite how vast and mighty it seemed, it was actually pretty fragile.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Jackson really dives into this whole idea that Timur's constantly having to play chess with his own court, always trying to keep everyone in check, literally.
Right, because he's got those ambitious family members always lurking in the shadows, not to mention those powerful emirs.
Exactly. It's like a recipe for disaster, right?
Yeah.
Backstabbing, power grabs. The book describes all these tactics. Timur used strategic marriages, constantly shuffling governorships, moving people around.
Oh, and let's not forget, taking someone's city and turning it into a giant skull pyramid.
Right. Talk about a motivational tool.
Effective. But I'm guessing not exactly a recipe for long-term stability. It almost sounds like, in a way, his empire was doomed from the start, like even if he couldn't see it at the time.
In a lot of ways, yeah, I think you're right. Jackson makes a really compelling argument that Timur's whole system relied way too much on him personally.
Because he was such a strong personality?
He was. He was the glue, the terror, and the mastermind all rolled into one.
So when he died,
it all fell apart. Those cracks that were always there, even if they were hidden, they became like gaping canyons.
Yeah.
Without that iron fist, that strategic genius, his successors just couldn't hold it together.
They couldn't inspire that same fear and respect.
Exactly. So they started fighting amongst themselves, and the empire fractured. Just like that.
It's a powerful reminder that even these seemingly mighty empires, built through fear and conquest, they're only as strong as their foundation. It makes you wonder, what was Timur's lasting impact, He's not exactly a household name like Genghis Khan.
That's a great question. And it's something historians still debate. But, in a way, while Genghis Khan created the Mongol Empire, Timur represents its afterlife.
The after party.
Right. It's this kind of turbulent, chaotic, but also fascinating reinvention of what it meant to be Mongol in a new era. Timur took those Mongol traditions, fused them with Islamic influences, and sprinkled in his own brand of, shall we say, ruthlessness.
A dash of ruthlessness.
Exactly. And his impact, it's undeniable. He shaped the political map and left behind a cultural legacy that is still visible, even today.
We see his echoes in the Mughal Empire, right? Weren't they descended from him?
They were. Founded by his descendants in India, no less. And even today, the way he's portrayed in art, in literature, Timur, the ruthless conqueror, the patron of the arts, the enigma, he definitely left his mark on the world.
He really did.
And that brings us to this really thought-provoking point that Jackson makes at the end of the book. What if Timur had never come along?
Ooh, that is a good question.
Right, because his reign, as brutal as it was, it kind of inadvertently laid the groundwork for these powerful Muslim empires that emerged in the 16th century.
Like the Ottomans, and the Safavids, the Moguls.
Yes, all of them. So without Timur, would we even have seen those empires rise to prominence? Would the world look completely different today?
Wow. It's mind-blowing to think about.
Right.
Timur might not be a name everyone knows off the top of their head, But his story, as brutal and as brilliant as it was, really shows us that even those who are kind of shrouded in shadow can still have a hand in shaping the course of history.
Couldn't have said it better myself.